for fuck's sake. Well, that'll do, I guess. I'm going to be honest, as much as I am a little bit heartbroken by it, it actually feels like a huge weight off my shoulders that this is just all over and done with now. Right, in the aftermath of Bruno leaving, there's been a lot said about it, so I'm going to give you my thoughts on things and where I think things go from here. Now, one of the main things that's levelled against Bruno in the aftermath of all this is that he hired a super agent. Now, I've seen reports that claim that that isn't actually true and that he has always worked for Bruno. He's always been part of his agent team. Now, I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but apparently that is the case. He didn't go out and hire him to, you know, force a move through this summer or anything like that. He's just kind of always been there, you know, working on Bruno's behalf. And I guess if Bruno decided he wants to leave, then he can leave. Now, me having said that, this isn't going to be me defending Bruno at all, because I don't think Bruno's a rat. I don't think he took the approach that Isak took, but I also don't really think that Bruno's legacy lives on in the way that he wanted it to, which I will explain in a second. But first of all, I think the first thing I have to comment on is the price. 75 million. And there is some reports to say that there is add-ons. So basically from Arsenal, they're saying it's 75 million. In the reports that we saw from the Northeast journalists, again, they say 75 million, but they allude to some other things. And apparently sources close to Bruno have said that there are some sort of performance related add-ons. Again, like with everything in this story, there's been so many kind of mixed messages everywhere that it's hard to tell what is really true. Even the same with what I said before about Kia Jurabachayan or whatever he's called. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but the same with him. Like, we just don't really know what's true because there's been so many things being said from every side of the story. But for me, the 75 million, it comes across as very weak from the ownership, because I understand that to Arsenal, Bruno probably isn't, well, he is because they paid it, but realistically, he probably isn't worth 75 million. If you look at Bruno as a player, as a 29-year-old player, he's probably not worth 75 million, or he's about to be 29 in a month or so. So if you just look objectively at him as a player, yes, he's not worth 75 million, but to us, he is worth significantly more than 75 million. And this is where it comes across as quite weak, and also why I think Bruno's legacy, it isn't going to be what he wanted it to be. So first of all, I'll explain why it comes across as quite weak, and then obviously I'll explain what it's done to Bruno's legacy. Now, the reason to me it comes across as quite weak is simply because it feels very much like the reason we accepted this is because we're scarred from the year before. It seems very much like all the bad press that we got about the Isak situation, everything that happened with that, how it affected the pre-season, how, you know, we had so many people saying like, oh, Newcastle keep players hostage, all that kind of stuff. It seems like we were so afraid of going into any of that that we were just like, look, if he's being respectful and if he's complying with everything that we're saying, then just as an almost like publicity thing, we have to just let him go. And that's why to me it comes across as a little bit weak, because it's like, realistically, we have goals that we're setting as a club. We have goals that we're trying to achieve. We shouldn't really give a fuck what anybody else thinks. Whether people think that we keep players hostages, whether clubs think that we're hard to negotiate with or whatever, we shouldn't really give a fuck. I know I was very critical of him, but Eddie Howe said it very well. We're not here to be liked. We're here to compete. And as I said, all of this just kind of stinks really of a fear of not wanting to deal with any of the problems that we dealt with the Isak situation. And I think what that kind of does is it creates a bit of a precedent to a certain extent that if you want out of this club, there is always a way out, really. As soon as you decide you don't want to play for us anymore, it doesn't matter about your contract. you can go. Because the simple fact of the matter is we wanted more than 75 million. It has been reported that we wanted more than 75 million. And I think most of the fan base agree we wanted more than 75 million. 75 million seems very little for what Bruno was to us as a club. So for us to accept that, for us to accept something essentially not really on our terms, it means to a certain extent, we feel a little bit like our hand was forced. But the thing is, Bruno wasn't ever gonna go on strike, apparently, he says. So our hand wasn't really forced, but it was more forced by fear of being perceived to be keeping a player hostage and fear of going through the Isak situation. As I said, I think we were just scarred from what happened the year before. But having said that, we've put out there that you can't take the dickhead approach to try and leave, because look what happened with Isak. We have at least set a precedent then to say, you know, if you do take the more respectful approach, then you have a better chance of being able to leave, as Bruno has been able to. But I think what needs to happen from here, and this is vitally important, is that Lewis Hall, under no circumstances can he leave. Under no circumstances. Because this is where we have to be able to say, as much as some players might want to leave, they might not want to leave. I don't know if Lewis Hall wants to leave. If he does want to leave, we have to essentially say, it doesn't fucking matter, because we also still have aspirations as a club. We also still are trying to achieve something, and we have to get to a point where we're like, enough is enough. Like, we still need to be able to look after ourselves and not worry about the perception of other clubs, or be worrying about, you know, is this player going to have a hissy fit or anything like that. We just have to set some fucking boundaries and say, this is what's happening. Fortunately, from everything that I'm reading, it seems like that's the stance that we're taking with Lewis Hall, and it doesn't seem like Lewis Hall is pushing to get away from the club. But personally, I think that we should have taken that hardline stance with Bruno as well. We should have made sure that it was on our terms. So realistically, I think we should have been saying, look, you can stay for one more year, then you can go. We have plenty of time to plan for your departure then. We've already sold 2 or 3 of our star players this summer. He's the captain of the team. He is the heartbeat of the team. Like, there are so many reasons why we should not have just made that sale. Having said that, I do see the potential positives to it. It is the maximum amount that we are ever going to get for Bruno. Obviously, we also don't then have a player that's not fully invested in this like new era with the new manager coming in. Everyone that's there, we're going to want everyone to be fully invested. There is a potential. Gisela even had that meeting with him and he was like, yeah, this guy's not fully invested here. I don't want him here. We don't know. We don't know if that's happened. But there is also the element that like we have to take into account the age as well, in the sense that once Bruno is sold at the age that he's at, we've got maximum price for him. And then we can use that money to go and take another player of hopefully similar level, similar experience to Bruno, but a bit younger. We can maybe mold him into being the actual level of Bruno. So he might not be quite as good as Bruno, but we go reinvest the money into a player who's younger, build him up to be Bruno's level. And then essentially what we've done is we've gone and bought low, sell high again. And we essentially just rinse and repeat that model. So obviously in terms of sustainability, in terms of what we're trying to do going forward, it is probably the right decision to make to sell Bruno right now. And I think one of the biggest reliefs is Gisela coming in, because if we still had Eddie Howe and Bruno had gone, I genuinely think we would have been relegated. Like, Eddie Howe categorically could not seem to win a game without Bruno, whereas hopefully Gisela can. I think it is vitally important for Gisela having any chance of being able to do anything this season. This is where we draw the line. It doesn't matter who wants to leave from this point. This is where we draw the line. This is where we take the Morgan Gibbs White approach. This is where we say, no, fuck off. Enough is enough. Because as I said, we've shown everything that we need to show. We've done all the PR. We shouldn't be caring what other people think, but we've done everything. We've shown you can't be a dickhead. We've shown if you are respectful, we won't keep you a hostage. That we don't need to do that anymore. We also need to also show our own fans we actually are trying to fucking do something here, and we do have some ambition, and we aren't just going to sell every single player that ever remotely mentions they might want to leave the club. It isn't just going to be a case of every single bid that comes in, oh, off he goes. Whereas if you look at a Nottingham Forest, if you look at the hard line that they took with Morgan Gibbs White, and then you look at how they are then perceived and how they can then go and stretch Man City to get the amount that they did for Elliot Anderson, as I said, this is where we need to start showing that we can't just be bullied. And I'm going to explain how I think we got bullied, and also why I think, as much as I aren't going to call Bruno any names, why I think he was a large part to play in it. Or at least his legacy isn't going to be what he wanted it to be. So it's been reported that if Bruno had said that he wanted to stay at any point, we would have refused all bids that came in from Arsenal. It's also been reported that Jaisler had a chat with Bruno. It's been reported that, you know, people were trying to persuade Bruno to stay. And essentially, he was pretty adamant that he wanted to leave. And for me, that's essentially how you end up in this situation where we are selling for less than we wanted to. Bruno was in the perfect scenario where towards the club, the best thing he could do was be respectful. Towards getting his move, the best thing he could do was be respectful. And towards trying to maintain his legacy, the best thing he could do was being respectful. That was exactly where he wanted the situation to be. I think all along, Bruno knew the only way he was getting the move was by being respectful, just because of the position that that put us in PR-wise, off the back of what happened last season. Because if Bruno is respectful in how he goes about it, we then start to, it looks like we're the problem then. We start getting all this PR labeled at us of like, oh, well, it happened with Isak last year and we held him hostage and now it's happening again with Bruno. And then that PR would all start being labeled at us. So that puts Bruno in a very strong position. So to me, it sort of feels a little bit like he kind of used the Isak situation and the way that the club was affected by that last year. It seems a little bit like he used that to his advantage to get his move this year, which this is where I say it tarnishes his legacy a little bit, because for someone who came out so venomously about the way that Isak went last year, kind of used it to his advantage to get his move away this year. I think so anyway. They are, of course, very different scenarios. I just think Bruno has been very, very smart about the way that he went about it. I think he has used the almost like insecurity, I guess, that we have off the back of Isak's situation last year, the insecurity we now find ourselves in. I think he's played on that to get his move. Personally, that's what I think anyway. But having said all that, I'm still not, as I said, I'm still not going to sit here and call Bruno names, because at the end of the day, he did captain us to winning a trophy. He did emotionally invest in the club's culture. He gave 120% in every game that he played for us. And I can't fault him for that. As I've said in previous videos, I would rather have 1,000 more Brunos than more Tonali's and Isaks, because as much as, yes, Bruno did give a lot of spiel and it is hard to emotionally disconnect when he does leave, I think we just have to manage our expectations as fans, because I would rather have players come in and give their everything to the club and buy into everything whilst they're here, with the possibility of them eventually leaving, as opposed to players coming in and half-arsing it and never really buying in and never really giving their all and then leaving and it being much easier to handle. I do think to a certain extent Bruno clearly didn't understand what he was actually saying when he said that he wanted to be like a Shearer, because Shearer was quite literally the complete opposite. Shearer would have guaranteed gone on to win many trophies if he wanted to, but he chose to play for his boyhood club. And obviously, Newcastle is not Bruno's boyhood club, but he started to develop a connection with the fans as if it was. And he went on to almost go on as if he wanted to be like Shearer, saying such in an interview. But at the end of the day, he's chosen not to be like an out-and-out legend at this club, to tarnish that legend status for trophies, which, as I said, is the exact opposite of what Shearer chose. Having said that, Newcastle back then were much more likely to compete for a trophy than we are now. So you can also, I do completely understand why Bruno has left. I do completely understand that it is a case that the club have not matched his expectation, and it is more a case of we've failed him than he's failed us. But at the same time, I aren't just going to sit here and be like, oh, well, he wasn't as bad as Isak, therefore he's still a legend, because he's held to a much higher standard than Isak ever was. He is the captain of the club. And from what we're being told, he was adamant he wanted to leave. And for a lot of the things that he said when he wanted this legendary status, to then go on and be that adamant to leave, I don't think it really lines up. And I think as much as I'll always be grateful for everything that he did whilst he was here, it has tarnished his legacy. His legacy will not be what it could have been if he'd stayed. And he will probably win trophies at Arsenal, but he won't be immortalised in their history. He will just be one of many players that have won things at Arsenal. At Newcastle, if he'd have stayed, he would have been immortalised in history. But having said that, it is what it is. We move on, because where do we go from here? Obviously, I've already said the first thing is we do not fucking sell Lewis Hall. The first rule of Newcastle United Club is we do not sell Lewis Hall. The second rule of Newcastle United Club is we do not fucking sell Lewis Hall. And the third rule, I know this isn't really the Fight Club quote anymore, but the third rule of Newcastle United Club is we just don't sell any more of our fucking key players. For a while now. I think it obviously sort of goes without saying that it has to be an experienced player that replaces Bruno. There's talks that apparently there's a mystery player already lined up for that. Who knows, with the way things are moving in this transfer window, by the time I get this video out, we might already know who he is. But realistically, I think if we can go into next season having signed Musa, a replacement for Bruno, and potentially some centre-back cover, so like Scalvini maybe. I think in an ideal world, we obviously do sign more, but I think playing one game a week, I'd like to think that would be enough. Anything less than that, and I think we could have some problems. Obviously, let me know what you think in the comments. Is there any kind of positions that you think we need more than that? For me, as I said, it's Musa at right wing, centre mid, replacement for Bruno, and then a centre back. I'm hoping, you know, we've been linked with Scalvini a lot. I'm hoping that potentially gets done, although I'm not holding my breath on it because we've been linked with him a lot and it hasn't happened. I also think at this point, we just have to accept bids from someone for Jacob Murphy, Joe Willock, and Nick Pope. Like, they should not still be at this club if we're trying to start a new era. Like, what frustrates me so much is that we've just accepted less than we want to for Bruno, someone who we really should have, there should have been no scenario where we're accepting less than we want to, yet we have had interest in, because this is the thing that annoys me. People say, oh, well, you have to have interest in the player to sell them. We've had interest in Jacob Murphy. We've had interest in Joe Willock. We've had interest apparently in Nick Pope. All three of them have had potential interest this window. Yet it seems that we're holding out for more. And it's like, why could we not hold out more for Bruno, but we can for Joe Willock, we can for Jacob Murphy, we can for Nick Pope? Just accept a fucking bid and have them gone and get some replacements in. But anyway, overall, I'm feeling positive. It's a scary time. There's a lot of change. There's a lot going on. It's sort of a little bit hard to fully delve into that positivity with all the change that's going on and obviously with Bruno leaving and whatever. But ultimately, it is a new start. I'm excited to see what comes next season, and the season starts in 2 weeks, and I'm buzzing. I can't wait. All this media bollocks is finally over, and we get back to just watching football pretty soon, and we finally get lots of questions answered on how is Geisler going to play, because we can speculate as much as we want, but he's played differently at every club he's been to. So there are themes, but I can't wait to see more of how he's going to play and how he's going to adapt to the Premier League. Is he going to manage it in the Premier League? Let me know what you think. Do you think he's going to be able to do it in the Premier League? Going into this season, there's just so many questions, and I'm just very eager to start getting some answers. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm really just kind of embracing the chaos, because for me, towards the end of last season, I felt so bleak about the future of this club that because Eddie Howe was here and because it just seemed like we were spiraling downwards. It seemed very much like nothing was going to change. It seemed like for some reason Eddie Howe, no matter how badly he performed, he just seemed like he wouldn't get sacked. So now that we're in a position where we have a new manager, we have all this new stuff going on, it's given me this kind of like refreshed optimism, which I'm just really enjoying. So as much as there is a lot of chaos, I'm fully embracing that chaos. I'm fully just excited to see what it brings. So anyway, that's all I've got to say for this one. So that's all the noise for this one. Until the next one.